Close your eyes and travel back with me, far back through the endless corridors of time, to an age when the cosmos was younger and wilder, when the boundaries between heaven and earth were not merely philosophical concepts, but actual physical realities that could be traversed by those brave enough or foolish enough to attempt the crossing. We are journeying to ancient China, but not the China of emperors and dynasties, not the China of the Great War or the Forbidden City. We are going much further back to the mythic China, the China that exists in legend and in story, where the Jade Emperor ruled the heavens from his celestial palace, where dragons controlled the seas, where immortals walked among clouds, and where the very fabric of reality was woven from threads of magic and possibility. This is a China of infinite layers, a cosmos structured like a great bureaucracy where every realm had its proper place and every being its assigned role. At the top sat the heavens, the realm of gods and immortals, a place of jade palaces and golden halls, where celestial peach trees bore fruit that granted eternal life, where the Queen Mother of the West held her magnificent banquets, where the hierarchies of divine power stretched from the lowest heavenly clerk to the supreme Jade Emperor himself. Below the heavens stretched the mortal world, the realm of humans and animals, of mountains and rivers, of kingdoms that rose and fell like waves upon a shore, of lives that flickered brief and bright before guttering into darkness. And below, even the mortal world, lay the underworld, the realm of death and judgment, where the 10 kings presided over the dead, where the book of life and death recorded every soul's appointed hour, where the wheel of reincarnation turned eternally, carrying spirits from death to rebirth and back again. But our story does not begin in any of these realms, not precisely. Our story begins in a place that exists at the intersection of all of them, a place where the energies of heaven and earth converge with such intensity that they could no longer remain purely spiritual, but had to take physical form. Our story begins on a mountain that rose from the eastern seas like a pillar supporting the sky, a mountain called Flower Fruit Mountain. And on that mountain, there was a stone. Now this was no ordinary stone. This was a stone that had existed since the very formation of the world, a stone that had absorbed the essences of heaven and earth for countless ages, a stone that drank in the light of the sun and the radiance of the moon, a stone that felt the passage of wind and rain and snow and sunshine, absorbing all these elemental forces into its crystalline structure until it became something more than mere rock. The stone was massive, standing some 36 feet tall and 24 feet around, its surface weathered smooth by millennia of exposure, its interior humming with concentrated power that had nowhere to go, no release, building and building with each passing century until something had to happen, until the pressure became too great to contain. The stone had 9 apertures at its peak, 8 holes around its sides, and through these openings it breathed, if stone can be said to breathe. It inhaled the yang energy of heaven, the positive creative force, and the yin energy of earth, the negative receptive force, balancing these opposing powers within itself like a cosmic battery storing lightning. And then one day, after eons of this slow accumulation, the stone developed a womb. This is not metaphor. The ancient texts are quite clear about this. the stone developed an actual, functional womb, a space within its solid structure where something new could gestate, where the accumulated energies of countless years could finally take form. Within this stone womb, an egg began to form, not an egg of calcium and protein like a bird might lay, but an egg of pure condensed energy, an egg that was somehow both physical and spiritual, both real and metaphorical, an egg that contained within it all the wild, untamed possibility of creation itself. And then, after who knows how long, maybe days, maybe decades, the stone egg was complete. It sat within the stone, waiting, humming with potential, ready. When wind blew across the stone, striking it at just the right angle, finding just the right apertures, something shifted. The egg responded to the wind as if wind had been the missing element, the final ingredient needed to catalyze birth. The stone split open, not violently but decisively, cleaving apart as cleanly as if it had always been meant to open at precisely this moment. And from within the stone, from within the egg, there emerged a monkey. He stood fully formed, complete, perfect in every detail. His limbs were proportioned correctly, his senses all functioning, his body coordinated and capable. He was covered in golden brown fur that caught the sunlight and seemed to glow with its own inner radiance. But most remarkable were his eyes. When he opened them for the first time and looked around at the world he had been born into, two beams of golden light shot forth from those eyes, light so intense and pure that it pierced through the mortal realm, through the atmospheric layers that separated earth from heaven, shooting all the way up to the celestial palace itself, where it startled the Jade Emperor from his meditations. The Jade Emperor, ruler of all heaven, lord of the cosmos, felt these twin beams of golden light strike his palace and immediately dispatched two of his celestial officers to investigate who or what could produce such a phenomenon. What being possessed such power that his very first act of sight could reach all the way to heaven? The officers descended to the mortal world, following the light back to its source, and they found the stone monkey on Flower Fruit Mountain, blinking his luminous eyes, looking around with wonder at the mountain, at the sky, at the other monkeys who were slowly approaching him with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. The officers watched the stone monkey for a time, observing as he took his first steps, as he reached out to touch things, as he picked up a piece of fruit and ate it, discovering the sensations of taste and texture and satisfaction, of hunger. And as they watched, they saw the golden light in his eyes begin to dim as the monkey ate and drank, the intense radiance fading to a more normal glow. The officers returned to heaven and reported to the Jade Emperor that the source of the light was merely a monkey, a creature born from stone through some quirk of cosmic alignment. Unusual, certainly, but ultimately nothing to be concerned about. The Jade Emperor accepted this assessment and turned his attention back to more important matters. It was a decision he would come to regret. The stone monkey, whom we must now begin calling by the name he would eventually receive, Sun Wukong, though he did not have that name yet, quickly adapted to life on Flower Fruit Mountain. He was accepted by the other monkeys who lived there, hundreds of them, perhaps thousands, living in troops and families among the abundant fruit trees and bamboo groves and clear streams that made the mountain a paradise for their kind. Sun Wukong proved himself intelligent beyond normal monkey understanding, creative and curious and bold in ways that set him apart from his fellows. The defining moment came when the monkeys discovered a waterfall. They had known the waterfall was there, of course, had drunk from the stream that fed it, and had played in the pool at its base, but they had never thought to investigate what might lie behind the curtain of falling water. On a particularly hot day, as the monkeys clustered around the pool, seeking relief from the heat, one of them suggested that whoever was brave enough to leap through the waterfall and discover what lay on the other side should be named their king. Sun Wukong did not hesitate. While the other monkeys called out encouragement or warnings, while they debated among themselves whether such a feat was even possible, Sun Wukong simply leaped. He gathered his legs beneath him, crouched, and then sprang forward with all his considerable strength, launching himself through the air, through the cascading water, through the thundering curtain of white foam, disappearing from view so completely that the watching monkeys gasped, thinking perhaps he had been swept away or dashed against hidden rocks. But Sun Wukong emerged on the other side of the waterfall in a hidden cave, a magnificent cave carved by countless years of water flow, a cave with soaring ceilings and smooth walls, a cave spacious enough to house 1,000 monkeys comfortably, a cave that was cool and dry and perfect, a natural palace waiting to be claimed. Sun Wukong explored every corner of this cave, his golden eyes wide with delight, and then he leapt back through the waterfall to tell the others what he had found. The monkeys, true to their word, crowned him king on the spot. They called him the Handsome Monkey King, and they moved into the cave behind the waterfall, which they named the Water Curtain Cave. And for a time, life was very, very good. Sun Wukong ruled his monkey subjects with fairness and creativity, organizing them, teaching them games and dances, leading them on expeditions to find the best fruit trees and the clearest water sources. He was, by all accounts, an excellent king, beloved by his people, living a life of ease and pleasure that should have satisfied anyone. But Sun Wukong was not like anyone. He was born from stone that had absorbed the essences of heaven and earth. He was formed from concentrated yang and yin energy. He had announced his birth to the cosmos itself with beams of golden light that reached the celestial palace. He was not destined for a simple life, no matter how pleasant, and something in him knew this, some restless dissatisfaction that manifested one day when he witnessed something he had never seen before, a funeral. One of the older monkeys had died, simply died of old age, and the troop gathered to mourn their companion, to carry the body away, to express their grief in chattering calls and downcast faces. Sun Wukong watched this ritual and was struck by a realization that hit him with the force of a physical blow. He too would die. All of his subjects would die. Everything he had built, every relationship he had formed, every moment of joy and satisfaction he experienced, all of it was temporary. All of it would end. would be swept away by the inexorable tide of mortality that claimed every living thing. This thought terrified him in a way that nothing else had. He had not been afraid leaping through the waterfall. He was not afraid of predators or heights or storms, but the idea of death, of ceasing to exist, of everything he was simply stopping. This filled him with a dread so profound that he could think of nothing else. He became obsessed with the question of mortality, with finding some way to escape it, to transcend it, to achieve what the legend spoke of: immortality. The other monkeys did not understand his distress. They accepted death as natural, as simply the way things were. But Sun Wukong would not accept it. He announced to his troop that he was leaving Flower Fruit Mountain, that he was going on a quest to find a master who could teach him the secrets of immortality, who could show him how to break free from the wheel of life and death, how to achieve eternal existence. The monkeys wept at their king's departure, but they also understood, after their fashion, that this was something he had to do, that he would not rest until he had found what he was seeking. Sun Wukong constructed a raft from bamboo and logs, said his goodbyes, and set out across the eastern sea, not really knowing where he was going, simply trusting that the cosmos would guide him to what he needed. He sailed for days, maybe weeks, time losing meaning in the vastness of the ocean. He endured storms and hunger and the burning sun, but he did not turn back. His will was fixed, his determination absolute. He would find immortality, or he would die trying, and even death now seemed preferable to the slow decay of aging he had witnessed. Eventually, after trials that tested his resolve to its limit, Sun Wukong reached the western shore of the sea, landing in a realm called the Western Continent of Divine Victory. He pulled his raft onto the beach and began walking inland, asking everyone he met about masters and immortals and teachers of the Tao, the great way that led to transcendence. Most people thought him mad, a monkey dressed in crude clothes, asking about spiritual matters. But a few pointed him toward a mountain where, they said, a great teacher lived, a patriarch of immense wisdom and power who accepted only the most dedicated students. Sun Wukong climbed this mountain, following paths that wound through mist and forest, through bamboo groves and past waterfalls that reminded him of home. The mountain was called the Mountain of Mind and Heart, and at its peak, hidden among clouds and ancient trees, Sun Wukong found the cave of the slanted moon and 3 stars, home of the Patriarch Subodhi. Patriarch Subodhi was an enigmatic figure, a teacher who blended Buddhist wisdom with Taoist practices, who taught students from all realms, who had mastered secrets that few living beings comprehended. When Sun Wukong presented himself at the cave entrance, bowing respectfully, asking to be accepted as a student, the patriarch looked at him with eyes that seemed to see not just the present, but past and future as well. Eyes that recognized immediately that this was no ordinary monkey, but something special, something that had the potential for either great enlightenment or great destruction, possibly both. Subodhi accepted Sun Wukong as a student and gave him the name he would carry for the rest of his existence, Sun Wukong, which means monkey awakened to emptiness. a name packed with Buddhist philosophy about the illusory nature of reality, about the importance of recognizing the fundamental emptiness at the heart of all existence. It was a name meant to guide Sun Wukong toward enlightenment, though whether it succeeded in that goal is a matter of interpretation. For several years, Sun Wukong studied under Patriarch Subodhi, learning alongside other immortal students, doing menial tasks, tending gardens, fetching water, cleaning the cave, absorbing lessons about language and etiquette and philosophy. But he grew impatient with these basic teachings. He had not sailed across the ocean and climbed a mountain to learn how to sweep floors properly. He wanted the secret of immortality, wanted it with an intensity that burned in him like an unquenchable fire. Subodhi recognized this hunger, this desperate need, and one day, during a lecture, when Sun Wukong interrupted to insist that he be taught the way to eternal life and nothing else, the patriarch did something strange. He struck Sun Wukong 3 times on the head with his staff, turned his back, placed his hands behind him, and walked into his private chambers, closing the door behind him. The other students scolded Sun Wukong for his disrespect, for angering their master. But Sun Wukong understood immediately what Subodhi had done. The 3 strikes meant come at the 3rd watch of night, 3 hours after sunset. The hands behind the back meant enter through the back door. It was a code, a secret signal that only the most perceptive students would recognize. Subodhi was going to teach him, but privately, away from the others, because what he was about to impart was dangerous knowledge. Knowledge that could be misused, knowledge that required the proper understanding to wield safely. That night, at the appointed hour, Sun Wukong crept to the back of the cave and found the door slightly ajar. He slipped inside and found Patriarch Subodhi waiting for him, sitting in meditation. And for the next several hours, the patriarch revealed the secret formula for immortality. He taught Sun Wukong breathing techniques and meditation methods and internal alchemical processes that would transform his monkey body into something more, something that could resist the decay of time, something that could theoretically last forever. But Subodhi also warned Sun Wukong about the 3 calamities. Achieving immortality through Taoist cultivation was not simple defiance of natural law. Heaven itself would respond to such defiance by sending 3 elemental attacks designed to destroy those who had presumed to escape mortality. Every 500 years, heaven would send lightning to strike the cultivator. Then it would send fire, then wind, each more terrible than the last, each designed to burn away the presumption of immortality and return the cultivator to the proper order of death and rebirth. To protect against these calamities, Subodhi taught Sun Wukong the 72 transformations, a series of magical formulas that would allow him to change his shape into any form, any animal or object or person, to shift and adapt and hide from the heavenly attacks. The number 72 was not literal, but represented the full spectrum of possible transformations, an endless variety, limited only by imagination and skill. And with the transformations came something else, something the texts hint at, but never fully explain. Extra lives, as if each transformation represented a separate existence that Sun Wukong could draw upon, as if by learning to become other things, he had multiplied his own being. After Sun Wukong mastered the transformations, Subodhi taught him one more technique, perhaps the most famous of all Sun Wukong's abilities. He taught him the cloud somersault, a method of travel that allowed Sun Wukong to ride upon clouds, to leap into the air and soar across the sky, covering vast distances in a single bound. When Sun Wukong had perfected this technique, he could travel 108,000 li, roughly 54,000 kilometers, in a single somersault. This was speed beyond comprehension, the ability to cross entire continents in moments, to leap from horizon to horizon as easily as an ordinary being might step from one room to another. Armed with these abilities, with immortality and transformations and supernatural speed, Sun Wukong should have been the perfect student, the ideal cultivator who would use these gifts wisely and achieve enlightenment. But Subodhi knew better. He could see the flaw in Sun Wukong's character, the pride and ego and recklessness that would lead him into trouble. When Sun Wukong's fellow students asked him to demonstrate his abilities, and he proudly transformed himself into a pine tree in front of everyone, showing off his skills for the applause and admiration of his peers, Subodhi was furious. The patriarch called Sun Wukong before him and expelled him from the cave, banishing him, telling him never to return and never, under any circumstances, to reveal who had taught him these abilities. If people asked where he learned his powers, Sun Wukong was to say he learned them in dreams. Subodhi knew what was coming, could see the future unfolding, could see the chaos that Sun Wukong would cause, and he wanted no part of it, wanted to be able to deny any connection when the heavens came looking for the one responsible. Sun Wukong left the mountain of mind and heart, feeling betrayed and confused, not understanding why his master had rejected him so completely. But he had what he had come for. He had immortality. He had power. He had abilities that placed him far above ordinary beings. He returned to Flower Fruit Mountain, riding his cloud somersault, covering in hours a journey that had taken weeks by raft, and his monkey subjects rejoiced at his return, crowned him once again, celebrated his new powers. But Sun Wukong realized he still lacked something. He had incredible abilities, but he had no weapon to match them. A king needed a proper weapon, something worthy of his new status, something that could withstand the strength that now flowed through his immortal body. So he descended into the ocean, walking down through the waters as easily as if they were air, and he made his way to the palace of Aoguang, the Dragon King of the Eastern Sea. The Dragon King's palace was a place of wonder, built from crystal and coral, illuminated by luminescent pearls that cast a soft blue-green glow through the water. Schools of fish swam through the halls like courtiers, and the Dragon King himself sat on a throne of carved jade, ancient and powerful, ruler of all the creatures of the sea. When Sun Wukong announced himself and his purpose, requesting a weapon suitable for a warrior of his caliber, Aoguang was initially welcoming, if somewhat bemused by this strange monkey who could walk through his domain as if he belonged there. The Dragon King ordered his servants to bring various weapons from the armory. They brought an enormous sword weighing thousands of pounds thinking surely this would be too heavy for a monkey to lift. Sun Wukong picked it up one-handed and spun it experimentally, then set it aside, saying it was too light, too flimsy, not what he was looking for. They brought a massive spear, a halberd, a battle axe, each one heavier than the last. And Sun Wukong rejected them all, handling weapons that would have crushed ordinary warriors as if they were made of bamboo. Ao Guang was growing frustrated and more than a little nervous. What kind of creature was this monkey who could handle weapons meant for giants? The Dragon Queen, watching from her own throne, suggested something to her husband. In the deepest part of their treasury, holding down the very foundations of the ocean itself, there was an iron pillar, a relic from ancient times, when the legendary Emperor Yu the Great had used it to measure and control the flood waters that threatened to drown the world. After its purpose was served, Yu had left the pillar here, where it had remained for countless ages, immovable, immutable, doing nothing except taking up space and marking the proper depth of the sea. The Dragon King reluctantly mentioned this pillar to Sun Wukong, thinking perhaps he could finally get rid of the impertinent monkey by sending him after something impossible to move. He led Sun Wukong to the deepest vault of the palace, and there, embedded in the floor, radiating a faint golden glow, was the pillar. It was black iron banded with gold rings at each end, standing some 20 feet tall and as thick around as a large barrel. Inscribed along its length were the words, "Compliant, golden hooped rod. Weight, 13,500 catties," which translates to approximately 17,550 pounds, or just under 8 tons. Sun Wukong approached the pillar and placed his hands upon it, and something extraordinary happened. The pillar began to glow more brightly, recognizing in Sun Wukong a kindred spirit, something that had also emerged from the elemental forces of creation, something that deserved to wield it. Sun Wukong lifted the pillar from the floor, and the entire palace shook. The ocean floor trembled as the weight that had been holding down the very foundations of the sea was removed from its place. Sun Wukong hefted the pillar experimentally and said aloud, "It's good, but it would be better if it was smaller, easier to handle." And the pillar obeyed. It shrank down to a more manageable size, perhaps 6 feet long and as thick as a rice bowl, the perfect proportions for a staff. Sun Wukong was delighted. He spun it through forms and patterns, testing its balance, and found it absolutely perfect. When he wasn't using it, he discovered he could shrink it further, down to the size of a needle, and tuck it behind his ear for safekeeping, ready to call upon at any moment. The staff, which would become known as the Ruyi Jingu Bang, or the As You Wish Golden Hooped Rod, was more than just a weapon. It was sentient in its own way, responsive to Sun Wukong's thoughts and intentions, capable of changing its size from something vast enough to reach from earth to heaven, down to something small enough to hide behind an ear. It could multiply itself, creating copies that shared its essential nature. It could transform into other forms, becoming whatever tool was needed in a given moment, adapting to circumstances with the same fluid intelligence that Sun Wukong himself possessed. And it was indestructible. its iron forged in ages past by forces that no longer existed in the world, strong enough to withstand anything that might be brought against it. With his staff in hand, Sun Wukong returned to Flower Fruit Mountain, feeling complete for the first time. He had immortality, he had magical abilities, he had a weapon that matched his strength, and he had subjects who loved and admired him. But rather than being satisfied, rather than settling into his role as king and enjoying what he had achieved, Sun Wukong began to feel constrained by the very success he had attained. What was the point of having all this power if he remained merely king of some monkeys on a mountain? What about the larger cosmic order? What about the hierarchies that determined who ruled what and who answered to whom? Sun Wukong began to gather allies, other powerful beings who, like him, chafed against the rigid structures imposed by heaven. He formed a brotherhood with 6 demon kings, mighty figures who ruled their own territories, each one a force to be reckoned with. There was the Bull Demon King, whose strength rivaled Sun Wukong's own, whose wife was Princess Iron Fan, controller of mighty winds. There were others, each with their own powers and domains, and together they called themselves the 7 Sages, binding themselves with oaths of brotherhood and mutual support. This alliance was more than just social. It was political, even revolutionary. The 7 Sages represented a challenge to the established order, a coalition of powerful beings who did not accept the divine right of heaven to dictate terms to everyone below. They did not raid or pillage or cause destruction for its own sake, but their very existence was a statement, a declaration that the old hierarchies were not absolute, that power could exist outside the celestial bureaucracy, that beings born from stone or transformed through cultivation or simply possessed of exceptional abilities did not necessarily owe obedience to the Jade Emperor simply because he sat on the highest throne. Word of Sun Wukong and his brotherhood reached heaven, and the celestial court was troubled. This monkey had power that exceeded many of the lesser gods. He had a weapon that had once been used by a legendary emperor. He had allies who commanded significant forces. He represented a potential threat, but he was not yet openly rebellious, not yet deserving of the full wrath of heaven. So the court decided on a different approach. They would offer Sun Wukong a position in heaven, give him a title and responsibilities, bring him into the system where he could be watched and controlled and kept from causing trouble. An envoy descended to Flower Fruit Mountain with an official decree from the Jade Emperor himself, offering Sun Wukong the position of Keeper of the Heavenly Horses. This sounded impressive, and Sun Wukong, flattered by the attention from heaven, agreed immediately. He appointed capable deputies to govern Flower Fruit Mountain in his absence, and ascended to the celestial realm, riding on clouds, arriving at the palaces of heaven with all the excitement of someone who believed he was finally being recognized for his true worth. The keeper of the heavenly horses, Sun Wukong discovered, was responsible for managing the stables where heaven's divine horses were kept. Magnificent creatures that could gallop across the sky, that pulled the chariots of gods and carried messages between realms. It seemed like an important job, and Sun Wukong threw himself into it with characteristic energy. He reorganized the stables, improved the feeding schedules, exercised the horses personally, and took pride in keeping every animal healthy and well-groomed. But then Sun Wukong learned something that shattered his satisfaction. At a banquet, drinking with some of the other celestial officials, he asked casually what rank the position of keeper of the heavenly horses held in the heavenly hierarchy. The answer, delivered with thoughtless honesty by an official who had drunk too much celestial wine, was devastating. The position was Bima Wen, which was not even a ranked position. It was below the lowest official rank, a position so minor that it barely counted as being part of heaven at all. It was a stable hand job, dressed up with an impressive title to fool whoever was stupid enough to accept it. Sun Wukong felt humiliation burn through him like acid. He had been tricked. Heaven had not recognized his worth at all. They had brought him here not to honor him, but to neutralize him, to give him busy work that would keep him occupied while the real powers of heaven continued their business without interference. He had been played for a fool, and worse, he had fallen for it completely, had been grateful for what he now recognized as an insult. Sun Wukong's rage was immediate and absolute. He destroyed the stables, freeing all the heavenly horses, watching them gallop off into the cosmic void, scattering across realms. He turned his staff on the celestial officials who tried to stop him, sending them flying, breaking through gates and walls, fighting his way out of heaven in a whirlwind of fury. He returned to Flower Fruit Mountain and planted a banner at its peak, a banner that declared his new title, a title he gave himself: Great Sage Equal to Heaven. This was open rebellion now, an explicit rejection of heaven's authority, a statement that Sun Wukong considered himself the equal of the Jade Emperor himself, that he would not accept any subordinate position, that he demanded recognition as a peer to the highest powers of the cosmos. The banner was a slap in the face to every hierarchy that structured reality, and heaven could not ignore it. The Jade Emperor sent armies to bring Sun Wukong to heel, celestial warriors and gods and generals who descended on Flower Fruit Mountain with weapons drawn and battle cries echoing across the sky. Sun Wukong met them with his staff and his transformations and his boundless confidence, and he defeated them. He defeated them all. Armies that should have crushed him found themselves scattered and broken. Gods who had reigned for millennia found themselves humbled by a monkey who had been born from a stone only decades ago. No matter who heaven sent, Sun Wukong proved stronger, faster, more clever, more determined. Out of desperation, or perhaps genuine respect for Sun Wukong's abilities, heaven offered a compromise. They would give him the title he had claimed for himself, would officially recognize him as the great sage equal to heaven. But he would have duties to perform. They appointed him guardian of the Peach Garden, thinking this would keep him occupied and satisfied, while also keeping him away from more important celestial affairs. The Peach Garden was one of heaven's great treasures, home to the trees of immortality, peach trees that bore fruit only once every several thousand years. There were trees that fruited every 3,000 years, granting 300 years of life to anyone who ate one of their peaches. There were trees that fruited every 6,000 years, granting instant enlightenment and immortality. And there were the most precious trees, which fruited every 9,000 years, granting immortality so profound that eating just one peach would make you equal to the cosmos itself in longevity. These peaches were served at the grandest banquets of heaven, distributed carefully among the highest-ranking gods and immortals, each peach accounted for, each one a mark of favor from the celestial court. And now Sun Wukong was guardian of the entire garden, responsible for their care, for keeping track of which trees were ready to fruit, for ensuring no unauthorized being stole these precious treasures. Sun Wukong surveyed his new domain with satisfaction. This was a position worthy of his abilities, a position that put him in charge of something truly valuable. He walked among the peach trees, breathing in their fragrance, watching their blossoms with appreciation. But then, inevitably, temptation struck. These peaches granted immortality. Sun Wukong was already immortal, having achieved that through Subodhi's teachings, but he reasoned that additional immortality could only make him stronger, more resilient, more powerful. Surely, as guardian, he was entitled to sample the product he was protecting. So Sun Wukong began eating the peaches. Not all of them, not all at once, but regularly, systematically, working his way through the garden. He ate the 3,000-year peaches, then the 6,000-year peaches, then finally the 9,000-year peaches, the most precious fruits in all of heaven, the ones reserved for the Jade Emperor and the highest deities. With each peach he consumed, Sun Wukong felt power flooding through him, felt his already immortal body becoming more immortal, felt the boundaries of death receding further and further from any possibility of reaching him. But his greatest coup, his most audacious act of theft, came when he was not invited to the peach banquet. The Queen Mother of the West was holding her grandest feast, the banquet where the peaches were served, where all the highest gods and immortals gathered to celebrate and socialize and consume the fruits of immortality. Invitations went out to everyone who mattered in the celestial hierarchy, and Sun Wukong, despite his title of Great Sage, equal to heaven, did not receive one. This oversight, whether intentional or merely bureaucratic negligence, enraged Sun Wukong. He was supposedly equal to heaven, supposedly recognized as a peer to the greatest powers, and yet he was not invited to heaven's most important social event. This was the same humiliation as being made keeper of the heavenly horses, the same pattern of false respect concealing true disdain. Sun Wukong decided to attend the banquet anyway, but not as a guest. He used his transformations to disguise himself as one of the celestial servants, and he arrived early, before any of the actual guests. He found the banquet hall prepared with incredible luxury, tables laden with delicacies, jars of wine that could grant visions of the past and future, dishes made from ingredients that took centuries to mature, and most importantly, plates of fresh peaches from the garden he guarded, the last of the harvest, set aside for this feast. While he was there, alone in the hall with all this treasure, Sun Wukong decided to help himself. He ate the food, drank the wine, consumed more peaches, gorging himself on immortality upon immortality, stacking layer after layer of eternal life onto a foundation that was already unshakable. But eating and drinking were not enough. Sun Wukong wanted to send a message, wanted to demonstrate his contempt for heaven's hierarchies in the most outrageous way possible. He found his way to the workshop of Laozi, the Grand Supreme Elderly Lord, one of the highest and most revered figures in all of heaven, the master of alchemy who created pills and elixirs of supreme power. In Laozi's laboratory, Sun Wukong found the pills of immortality, golden pills that granted instant eternal life to anyone who consumed them, pills that took millennia to concoct, each one representing ages of alchemical work. Sun Wukong ate them like candy, swallowing handful after handful, adding yet another layer of immortality to his already impossibly durable existence. When heaven discovered what Sun Wukong had done, the response was inevitable, like clouds gathering before a storm that must eventually break. He had stolen from the peach garden he was supposed to protect. He had consumed the food meant for the highest gods. He had taken the pills of immortality from Laozi's laboratory. Each act, considered separately, might have been forgiven, explained away, absorbed into the vast machinery of celestial bureaucracy. But together, they represented something heaven could not ignore. A complete rejection of the order that held the cosmos together. The Jade Emperor, sitting on his throne, made the decision that had perhaps always been inevitable from the moment golden light shot from a stone monkey's eyes to disturb his meditation. Sun Wukong would be captured. He would be executed. The sentence was pronounced calmly, bureaucratically, without personal anger, which somehow made it more terrible than any rage could have been. Forces were sent to Flowerfruit Mountain. Gods and generals descended, beings of immense power who had maintained cosmic order for millennia, who had faced threats and dangers beyond mortal comprehension, and one by one, they returned to heaven unsuccessful, or they did not return at all. Sun Wukong met each challenge with his staff and his transformations and his impossible layers of immortality, and heaven began to understand that this problem would not be solved easily. Even Erlang Shen, the Jade Emperor's own nephew, one of the mightiest warriors in all the celestial realm, could only match Sun Wukong, could only fight him to exhaustion on both sides, neither able to claim true victory. Erlang Shen deserves more attention here because his relationship with Sun Wukong is more complex than simple enmity. Erlang Shen was himself a rebel in spirit, though he had learned to wear the mask of obedience. He had grievances against heaven's rigid laws that cut as deeply as any wound. His mother had fallen in love with a mortal, a violation of celestial law, and she had been imprisoned beneath a mountain as punishment, buried alive in stone for the crime of loving someone heaven deemed inappropriate. His father and brother had been killed for their association with this forbidden love. Erlang Shen served heaven, fought for heaven, enforced heaven's laws. But he did so carrying the weight of knowing those same laws had destroyed everyone he loved most. When Erlang Shen and Sun Wukong met in combat, something passed between them, some recognition that transcended their roles as enforcer and rebel. They saw in each other the same pain, the same understanding of heaven's cruelty dressed as order, the same knowledge of what it meant to lose everything to celestial law. Their confrontation lasted for hours, both changing forms, both demonstrating abilities that few beings possessed. Mountains trembling beneath their passage, seas disturbed by their movements. But beneath the surface display of power, there was something almost sorrowful in their exchange, as if they both understood they were merely playing out roles that had been written for them, that in another world, another life, they might have been brothers rather than enemies. Eventually, inevitably, through a combination of skill and reinforcement, and simply the exhaustion that comes from fighting someone whose abilities match your own, Sun Wukong was captured. Not defeated exactly, but brought to a point where he could no longer continue, where even his boundless energy found its limit. He was brought before the Jade Emperor in chains, and the Emperor, still calm, still bureaucratic, ordered his immediate execution. But how do you execute someone who has achieved multiple layers of immortality? Someone who has eaten the peaches of immortality, drunk the wine of eternal life, and consumed the pills of immortality? Someone whose name has been erased from the book of life and death? Someone who has been through Subodhi's training and achieved Taoist transcendence of mortality? Heaven tried. Method after method was applied, each one failing in its turn. The executioner's blade, which had ended the existence of countless beings, met Sun Wukong's neck and broke, the metal unable to pierce skin that had been fortified by so many different sources of immortal power. Fire was brought, flames that could consume demons and spirits, and Sun Wukong stood within them unharmed, untouched, as if the heat were merely warm sunlight on a pleasant day. Every method of execution heaven possessed was attempted, one after another, and each one proved insufficient against the layers of immortality Sun Wukong had accumulated, some intentionally, some almost by accident, all of them now woven together into a protection that seemed absolute. Finally, after all conventional methods had failed, Laozi suggested one more possibility: his 8 trigrams furnace. The alchemical crucible where he created his pills and elixirs generated fires unlike any other in existence. These were not merely physical flames, but spiritual fires, cosmic energies that could break down any substance into its component elements. They could refine and purify and reduce anything to its essential nature. If Sun Wukong was placed within this furnace and subjected to 49 days of these transformative flames, surely his multiple immortalities would be burned away, refined back into their pure forms, and his physical body would be destroyed, or at least rendered mortal once more. Sun Wukong was sealed inside the furnace, and the fires were lit. For 49 days, he endured. The heat was beyond anything that can be properly described. Flames that attacked not just the body, but the spirit. Energies that sought to unmake him at every level of his being. But Sun Wukong, stubborn even in extremity, refused to surrender to dissolution. He found a corner of the furnace where wind elements mixed with the fire, creating a space that was slightly less lethal than the rest. And there he sheltered, protecting himself, simply enduring, counting the days, waiting for it to end. When the 49 days ended and Laozi opened the furnace, he expected to find ashes, or perhaps refined essence, that could be safely dispersed into the cosmos. What he found instead was Sun Wukong, still alive, still intact, still himself. The flames had not destroyed him. They had changed him, transformed something essential in his nature. His eyes, which had shot golden light at his birth, which had already seen so much, had been refined by the spiritual fires into something new. They became what would be called the fiery eyes of golden pupils, eyes that could perceive truth through any illusion, that could detect lies and disguises and transformations, that could see the real nature of things beneath their surface appearance. These eyes caused him pain, a constant burning sensation that would never fully leave him. But they also gave him a gift that few beings possessed, the ability to see what was actually there, rather than what appeared to be there. Sun Wukong emerged from the furnace changed, but not chastened, still carrying his anger, still refusing to accept heaven's judgment. He took up his staff once more and moved through the celestial realm with grim determination, no longer playing or boasting, but simply advancing, step by step, toward the throne room of the Jade Emperor himself. Gods and generals fell back before him, not because they were defeated in dramatic battles, but because they recognized something implacable in his movement, something that could not be reasoned with or turned aside. It seemed, for a moment, that stretched into something larger than time, that Sun Wukong might actually reach the throne, might actually succeed in overthrowing the ruler of heaven and establishing himself in that highest seat. In that moment, the Jade Emperor made a decision he had resisted until all other options were exhausted. He called for help from beyond heaven's normal hierarchies, from the Buddha, from Tathagata himself, from the enlightened one who dwelt in the Western paradise, who represented not power as heaven understood it, but something deeper, something that transcended the structures of dominance and submission that organized the celestial realm. The Buddha came, not dramatically but simply, appearing in the celestial palace the way mist appears in a valley, suddenly present, though no one saw the moment of arrival, vast and serene, and carrying with him a sense of calm that seemed almost alien in heaven's current state of crisis. Sun Wukong, still carrying the momentum of his advance through heaven, still convinced of his own righteousness and power, approached the Buddha with his usual boldness, though perhaps some part of him recognized that this being was different from the gods and generals he had faced before. He stated his case, his demand to be recognized as equal to heaven, his insistence that the Jade Emperor step down and acknowledge Sun Wukong's right to rule. The words were aggressive, challenging, but the Buddha responded not with matching aggression, but with a question, with a proposal that seemed almost gentle in its simplicity. If Sun Wukong could leap out of the Buddha's palm in a single somersault, the Buddha would support his claim to heaven's throne, would use his influence to establish Sun Wukong as ruler of the celestial realm. But if Sun Wukong could not escape the Buddha's hand, he would have to accept punishment, would have to submit to heaven's authority and acknowledge that his rebellion had failed. It seemed an easy wager, almost insulting in its simplicity. Sun Wukong agreed without hesitation. He knew his somersault cloud could carry him 108,000 li in a single leap, a distance that spanned continents, that could cross oceans and mountains and the spaces between realms. The Buddha's palm was perhaps a foot across, maybe slightly more. This was not a real challenge, Sun Wukong thought, but merely a formality before his victory was acknowledged. The Buddha opened his hand, palm facing upward, and the surface of that palm became a platform of flesh, warm and slightly yielding, and Sun Wukong stepped onto it and then launched himself upward with all the power his cloud somersault could provide. He flew. The sensation was familiar, the rush of movement, the world falling away below, but this time something felt different. Though Sun Wukong could not quite identify what had changed, he flew upward and outward, and the landscape of heaven fell away beneath him, becoming small, then tiny, then vanishing entirely as he rose into heights where the normal structures of reality became uncertain, where space itself seemed to stretch and bend in ways that defied ordinary understanding. He flew for what felt like hours, though time had become as uncertain as space, and still he continued, pushing himself forward, determined to reach the edge, to escape the Buddha's palm completely. Finally, after a journey that seemed to span half the cosmos, Sun Wukong saw something ahead. 5 enormous pillars rising from emptiness into infinite height. Pillars so massive they made mountains look like pebbles. Pillars that seemed to hold up the very structure of existence itself. This, Sun Wukong was certain, was the edge of everything, the absolute boundary of creation, the place where the cosmos ended and beyond which lay only void. He had done it. He had escaped the Buddha's palm, had flown to the very limits of reality in a single somersault. To prove his achievement, to have evidence that could not be disputed, Sun Wukong plucked a hair from his body and transformed it into a brush heavy with ink. On the middle pillar, he wrote carefully, "The great sage, equal to heaven, was here." And then, feeling a mixture of triumph and mischief, he relieved himself on the base of the pillar, marking the spot in the most primal and undeniable way possible, leaving proof that he had been to this remote place, this edge of everything. Satisfied, carrying his proof, Sun Wukong turned and somersaulted back, covering in moments the vast distance he had just traveled, arriving back at what he expected to be the celestial palace, landing on what should have been solid ground, ready to claim his victory and demand the Buddha's acknowledgement of his success. But when he opened his eyes and looked around, he was still standing on the Buddha's palm, and the Buddha was regarding him with an expression that held no triumph, no mockery, only infinite patience and a sadness that seemed to encompass all of existence. Sun Wukong looked around in confusion, insisting that he had succeeded, that he had proof, that he had reached the edge of the universe and marked it with his own hand and his own body. The Buddha simply raised his hand slowly, bringing his fingers into Sun Wukong's view, and there, written on the middle finger in unmistakable characters, were the words, "The great sage, equal to heaven, was here," and the base of that finger carried the unmistakable scent of monkey urine. The pillars had been the Buddha's fingers. The edge of the universe Sun Wukong thought he had reached was still contained within the Buddha's hand. His entire journey, that vast flight across what seemed like half the cosmos, had occurred within a space, no larger than a human palm. Sun Wukong stood very still as this understanding settled over him, as he realized the magnitude of what this meant, not just about the Buddha's power, but about the nature of reality itself, about how perspective shapes experience, about how even the most impressive achievements might be contained within something larger that we cannot perceive. Sun Wukong tried to move, tried to leap away, tried to return to Flower Fruit Mountain, where he could regroup and understand what had happened and perhaps find some way forward. But the Buddha was finished waiting, finished teaching through gentle lessons. He turned his hand slowly, the palm becoming the back, and as it turned, it grew, expanding from hand to mountain, from flesh to stone. And Sun Wukong found himself caught beneath it, pressed down, held in place by weight that increased with every moment, weight that represented not just physical mass, but the accumulated pressure of cosmic law, of natural order, of all the forces that Sun Wukong had spent his life defying. The hand became a mountain, massive and solid and immovable, pressing Sun Wukong to the earth, pinning him there with such absolute force that he could not shift even slightly, could not move his arms or legs or torso, could only breathe and blink and endure the crushing weight that held him. This mountain was called Five Elements Mountain, or Five Phases Mountain, named for the five fundamental elements that composed all existence: metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. It represented the totality of physical reality, all the forces of nature compressed into a single landmass, and Sun Wukong was trapped beneath it, unable to move, unable to free himself, held in place by the Buddha's power and sealed there with a talisman bearing the sacred mantra Om Mani Padme Hum. The Buddha did not kill Sun Wukong. He could have. The Enlightened One possessed power sufficient to erase Sun Wukong from existence, to unweave all his accumulated immortalities, to return him to the stone from which he had emerged. But the Buddha chose a different path, chose imprisonment rather than execution, chose to give Sun Wukong time to reflect, to learn patience and humility, to understand that true power comes not from defying authority, but from mastering oneself. Sun Wukong was positioned with only his head and hands protruding from the base of the mountain, able to see and breathe and speak, but unable to move his body, unable to escape. The Buddha assigned two earth spirits to care for the prisoner, to ensure he did not die during his confinement. When Sun Wukong was hungry, they fed him iron pellets, hard and tasteless, but providing sustenance. When he was thirsty, they gave him molten copper, liquid metal poured into his mouth, burning and terrible, but preventing him from dying of thirst. This diet was not just punishment, it was symbolic. Another part of the lesson the Buddha was teaching. Iron and copper are materials of the earth, minerals and metals, and by consuming them, Sun Wukong was being forced to accept his connection to the physical world, to the cycle of elements that he had tried to transcend through his multiple immortalities. The pain of the molten copper, the hardness of the iron pellets, these were reminders that even an immortal being could suffer, that even someone who had escaped death could know torment. And so Sun Wukong remained beneath Five Elements Mountain for 500 years. 500 years. not 5 days or 5 months, or even 5 years, but 5 centuries. A span of time that saw entire civilizations rise and fall in the mortal world, that saw empires born and destroyed, that saw generations of humans live their brief lives and return to dust, while Sun Wukong stayed trapped beneath the mountain, unable to move, fed on iron and copper, with nothing to do but think about his choices and the path that had led him to this punishment. Can you imagine that imprisonment? Try to conceive of it as you drift towards sleep. The crushing weight of the mountain pressing down on you, so heavy that you cannot even twitch a finger, cannot shift your position by the smallest fraction. The rough stone against your skin, unchanging, eternal, a texture that becomes so familiar you could map every grain in your mind. The slow passage of time, marked only by the rising and setting of the sun that you can glimpse from your pinned position, by the changing of seasons that you experience only as variations in temperature, by the occasional traveler who passes by and stares at you with a mixture of fear and pity. What did Sun Wukong think about during those 500 years? Did he rage against his confinement, cursing the Buddha and the Jade Emperor and heaven's entire structure? Surely at first, surely the early decades were filled with fury and schemes and desperate attempts to free himself that all failed against the weight of the mountain and the power of the Buddha's seal. But as the years stretched into centuries, as the burning anger cooled into something more permanent and profound, what then? Perhaps he thought about his birth from the stone, about those first moments of golden-eyed wonder when the world was new and full of possibility. Perhaps he thought about his time as handsome Monkey King, about the water curtain cave and his subjects who had loved him, about the simple joys of being king of monkeys on a mountain, joys he had abandoned in his quest for something greater. Perhaps he thought about Patriarch Subodhi, about the secret teachings delivered in the dead of night, about the warning he had ignored that these powers would lead to trouble. Perhaps he thought about the peaches he had eaten, the wine he had drunk, the pills he had consumed. All that accumulated immortality that had not saved him from 500 years of frozen suffering. Or perhaps, as the centuries wore on, as the initial fury burned itself out and left only ashes, Sun Wukong began to experience something new. Stillness. Not the forced stillness of his imprisonment, but an internal stillness, a quieting of the constant restless ambition that had driven him since birth. With nothing to do, nowhere to go, no way to act or react or change his circumstances, perhaps he finally learned what Subodhi had tried to teach him, what the Buddha had tried to show him, that true freedom comes not from power or immortality or victory over external forces, but from mastery over one's own mind and desires. The text describes Sun Wukong's 500 years under the mountain as punishment, and certainly it was that. But the Buddhist framework that underlies the story suggests it might also have been something else, an extreme form of meditation, a forced retreat from the world that gave Sun Wukong the one thing his frantic accumulation of power and abilities had never allowed him: time to simply exist without action, to be without doing, to sit with himself and confront the emptiness at the core of his being. Awakened to emptiness, that was the name Subodhi had given him, Sun Wukong, and perhaps only now, pinned beneath a mountain for 5 centuries, did he begin to understand what that name truly meant. Not emptiness as lack or absence, but emptiness as the fundamental nature of reality, as the space within which all things arise and pass away, as the silence from which sound emerges and into which it returns. Perhaps this was the Buddha's true gift, not punishment, but education, a harsh teaching for a student who had proven incapable of learning any other way. And while Sun Wukong suffered his mountain-bound meditation, the world continued its turning. Dynasties rose and fell in China. The Han dynasty gave way to the period of disunity, which gave way to the Tang dynasty, which brought with it a flowering of culture and art and learning. Buddhism, which had been a foreign import, became deeply rooted in Chinese soil, blending with native Taoism and Confucianism to create new forms of spiritual practice, new ways of understanding the cosmos and humanity's place within it. During the Tang dynasty, in the year 639, a Buddhist monk named Xuanzang, known also as Tripitaka or Tang Sanzang, undertook a pilgrimage of staggering ambition. He decided to travel from China to India, to the Buddhist holy lands, to the sources of the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha, to retrieve authentic scriptures and bring them back to China where they could be properly studied and disseminated. This was not a simple journey of a few weeks or months. It was an odyssey that would take 16 years, covering 10,000 miles through some of the most dangerous and difficult terrain in the world. Xuanzang was not a warrior monk or a miracle worker. He was a scholar, thin and gentle and devoted to his studies, more comfortable with ancient texts than with the rigors of travel. But he had a determination that rivaled even Sun Wukong's in its intensity, a conviction that what he was doing was necessary, that authentic Buddhist teachings were essential for the salvation of all beings, that no hardship was too great to endure in service of this goal. As Xuanzang traveled west, following ancient trade routes, crossing deserts where water was scarce and bandits were common, climbing mountain passes where the air was thin and the cold could kill, he was watched by forces he did not yet understand. The Bodhisattva Guanyin, the embodiment of compassion, had been given a mission by the Buddha himself to find suitable disciples who could protect Xuanzang on his journey, who could guard him from the demons and monsters and spiritual threats that would surely attempt to prevent his mission. Guanyin knew exactly where to find the first and most powerful of these disciples. She traveled to Five Elements Mountain, to the place where Sun Wukong had been imprisoned for 500 years, and she examined the prisoner pinned there. The centuries had changed him. The brash arrogance was still present, still part of his fundamental nature, but it was tempered now by something else, some quality that had not been there before, some understanding that had come from 500 years of forced contemplation. Guanyin spoke to Sun Wukong, offering him a choice. He could remain here beneath the mountain for eternity, could continue his punishment until the end of the current cosmic cycle and perhaps beyond. Or he could accept release, but only if he agreed to serve as guardian and disciple to the monk Xuanzang, to protect him on his journey to India and back, to devote himself utterly to someone else's mission rather than his own desires. Sun Wukong, who had once proclaimed himself great sage equal to heaven, who had rebelled against the entire cosmic order, who had fought armies and gods and nearly overthrown heaven itself, agreed immediately. Freedom, even freedom with conditions, even freedom that required service and obedience, was infinitely preferable to continued imprisonment. But Guan Yin was not finished. She knew Sun Wukong's nature, knew that even 500 years under a mountain might not have completely tamed his wild spirit, that he might betray Xuanzang or abandon him or return to his old rebellious ways. So Guan Yin provided Xuanzang with a gift, a golden circlet, a band that seemed like simple jewelry, but was actually a powerful magical artifact when the time came, when Xuanzang finally met Sun Wukong and freed him from the mountain. The monk would offer this circlet to Sun Wukong as a gift, a token of their new relationship, and Sun Wukong, not understanding its nature, would put it on. Once placed on his head, the circlet could never be removed. And when Xuanzang chanted a certain sutra, a certain collection of sacred verses called the tightening spell, the circlet would constrict, squeezing Sun Wukong's head with agonizing pain that no amount of strength or magic could resist. It was a leash disguised as a crown, a method of control that ensured Sun Wukong would obey Xuanzang's commands or suffer consequences he could not ignore or escape. This seems cruel, and Sun Wukong certainly thought so when he discovered the circlet's true nature. He raged and pleaded and threatened, tried to destroy it, tried to remove it, tried to kill Xuanzang to end the connection between them. But none of it worked. The circlet remained, and the tightening spell remained, and Sun Wukong was bound more securely by this simple band than he had been by 500 years under a mountain. But consider what the circlet represents beyond its surface function as a control device. It is called the tightening circlet, yes, but it could also be understood as a focusing mechanism, something that channels Sun Wukong's vast and chaotic power into directed purpose. Before the circlet, Sun Wukong's abilities were immense but undirected, explosive but ultimately destructive. He fought for his own glory, accumulated power for its own sake, rebelled without clear goals beyond his own aggrandizement. The circlet forced him to fight for someone else, to use his strength in service of a mission larger than himself, to become not a rebel, but a protector, not a chaos agent, but a guardian. This transformation from rebel to disciple, from chaos to purpose, forms the heart of Sun Wukong's true journey. His pilgrimage to India with Xuanzang, the adventures they would have, the demons they would face, the trials they would endure. All of this comprises the second act of Sun Wukong's story, the redemption arc that follows his fall. But that journey, that transformation, that long road to enlightenment is a story for another time, another telling, another slow drift into sleep. For now, let us leave Sun Wukong at the moment of his freedom, standing before Xuanzang at the base of Five Elements Mountain, the seal broken, the weight lifted, his limbs able to move for the first time in 5 centuries. Let us imagine his first breath of unrestricted air, his first steps on ground not crushing him. his first look at a sky he can reach by leaping, his first genuine smile in 500 years. The golden circlet is on his head. The tightening spell is ready to be used. The journey ahead is long and filled with dangers that will test even Sun Wukong's considerable abilities. But he is free, or as free as he will ever be. And that freedom, even restricted, even conditional, even bound by obligation, is precious beyond measure. Think on this as you drift towards sleep, as you descend into your own nightly rest, your own temporary cessation of movement and consciousness and action. Sun Wukong spent 500 years pinned beneath a mountain, trapped in a state between life and death, neither truly existing nor truly destroyed, frozen in a moment that stretched across centuries. Every night, in our own small way, we echo his experience. We lie down, we become still. We enter a state of reduced consciousness where we are not fully ourselves, where time becomes strange and dreamlike, where we are suspended between waking and death, experiencing a preview of the ultimate stillness that awaits us all. But unlike Sun Wukong's punishment, our sleep is temporary, gentle, restorative. We are not fed iron pellets and a molten copper, but allowed to rest in comfort and safety. We are not crushed by mountains, but supported by beds and pillows. We are not isolated for centuries, but will wake in hours to the people and places we love. Sleep is our kindness to ourselves, our nightly imprisonment that frees us, our small death that gives us life. Consider Sun Wukong's story as a meditation on power and pride and the price of both. Consider his birth from stone, his quest for immortality, his rebellion against heaven, his imprisonment, his eventual redemption through service. Consider the pattern of his life: birth, growth, accumulation of power, hubris, downfall, punishment, transformation, redemption. It is a universal story, one that repeats across cultures and mythologies. One that speaks to fundamental truths about the human condition, even when told through the adventures of a supernatural monkey. We all contain something of Sun Wukong within us. We all have that spark of rebellion, that resistance to authority and constraint, that desire to be recognized as special and important and worthy. We all accumulate our own forms of power, whether physical strength or intellectual ability or social status or financial resources. And we all must learn eventually that power alone is not enough, that accumulation without purpose leads only to emptiness. That true strength comes from mastery of self, rather than dominance over others. And we all face our own imprisonments, our own mountains that pin us down and prevent us from moving forward. Sometimes these mountains are external: illness, poverty, oppression, circumstances beyond our control that trap us in situations we would give anything to escape. Sometimes they are internal: fear, shame, trauma, psychological patterns that hold us in place more effectively than any physical restraint. And sometimes our mountains are a mixture of both: external circumstances that become internalized, outside pressures that we absorb and turn into self-imposed limitations. Sun Wukong's 500 years under the mountain can be read as an extended metaphor for depression, for trauma, for any state where we feel powerless and trapped, where time seems to stretch endlessly, where each day is the same as the one before, and the one that will come after, where hope feels like a distant memory and freedom like an impossible dream. But his story also reminds us that even the longest imprisonment eventually ends, that mountains can be moved, that seals can be broken, that what seems permanent is actually temporary, that transformation is always possible. The circlet on his head, the control mechanism that causes him pain, can be understood as discipline, as the structures we need to channel our energies productively. Sun Wukong resents the circlet, sees it as a limitation on his freedom, as yet another form of imprisonment. But over the course of his journey with Xuanzang, he would come to understand that the circlet is not a punishment, but a gift, not a chain, but a compass, not something that limits him, but something that gives his immense power actual direction and meaning. We all wear our own circlets, our own constraints that we sometimes resent, but that actually make us stronger. They are the commitments we make to other people, the responsibilities we accept, the roles we fulfill, the promises we keep even when keeping them is difficult. These obligations can feel like burdens, like restrictions on our freedom to do whatever we want whenever we want, like miniature imprisonments that prevent us from living with complete spontaneity. But they are also what give our lives meaning, what connect us to others, what transform our isolated individual existences into part of something larger and more significant. Let the story of Sun Wukong accompany you into sleep. Let his journey from stone to monkey, to king, to rebel, to prisoner, to disciple unfold in your drowsing mind like a scroll being slowly unrolled. Let his 500 years under the mountain remind you that even the longest suffering is not permanent, that patience is not just passivity, but an active cultivation of endurance, that stillness contains its own form of power. Sleep is your mountain, pressing you down into rest, keeping you in place for hours. And yet, it is also your freedom, your release from the demands of waking life, your temporary escape from responsibility and consciousness, and the weight of being yourself. In sleep, you are both trapped and liberated, both imprisoned and free, both the monkey under the mountain and the monkey leaping on clouds across the sky. Dream of Flower Fruit Mountain, of waterfalls concealing caves, of monkeys dancing in dappled sunlight, of fruit that grants immortality and wine that reveals truth. Dream of the water curtain, cave with its smooth walls and its echoing chambers, of the staff that weighs 8 tons but fits behind an ear, of eyes that shoot golden light toward heaven, of somersault clouds that can cross oceans in seconds. Dream of the mountain of mind and heart, where Patriarch Subodhi teaches secrets to those perceptive enough to understand coded messages delivered through violence and silence. Dream of the celestial palace with its peach gardens and pill furnaces and hierarchies stacked on hierarchies stretching from earth to heaven and beyond. Dream of the battle between monkey and God, between chaos and order, between the individual will and the cosmic system that seeks to contain it. Dream of the Buddha's palm, vast enough to contain the universe, deceptive in its apparent simplicity, powerful enough to transform from flesh to mountain, to hold Sun Wukong for 500 years while teaching the hardest lesson of all. That true freedom comes not from breaking chains, but from understanding why we forged them in the first place. Dream of the golden circlet tightening and loosening, hurting and releasing, controlling but also protecting, limiting but also focusing. Dream of Xuanzang walking west, thin and gentle and determined, carrying scrolls and prayers, protected by a monkey who would rather be anywhere else, but who slowly, reluctantly, unwillingly begins to care about this frail human and his impossible mission. Dream of transformation, of the 72 changes, of becoming a tree or a bird or a stone or a stream, of being everything and nothing, of holding form and releasing it, of understanding that identity is fluid and reality is shaped by perspective, and power is nothing compared to wisdom. Dream of iron pellets and molten copper, of sustenance that hurts, of nourishment that burns, of survival that requires accepting pain, of endurance that transforms suffering into strength. Dream of Earth Spirit standing watch, patient and eternal, feeding the prisoner century after century, marking time in units too large for human comprehension, waiting for the seal to break and the monkey to rise. Dream of rising, finally, after 500 years of stillness, of standing up and feeling your body respond, of taking a step and not being stopped, of looking up at the sky and knowing you can reach it, of freedom that comes with conditions, but is still freedom, still precious, still worth the price you paid and the price you will continue to pay. Dream of the journey that is just beginning, the journey to the West, the journey to enlightenment, the journey from rebel to hero, from chaos to purpose, from pride to humility, from immortality hoarded to immortality earned. Dream of demons that will be faced, and mountains that will be crossed, and rivers that will be forded, and sutras that will be retrieved and returned and shared. Dream of the Monkey King becoming the victorious fighting Buddha, of the stone monkey who defied heaven and learned to serve earth, of the rebel who found a purpose in protection, of the chaos that learned to dance with order rather than destroy it. Dream of transformation that is complete and authentic, of change that comes not from external force, but from internal realization, of growth that is painful and slow, but ultimately real. And as you dream these dreams, as you drift deeper into sleep, as your consciousness becomes less defined and your sense of self becomes more fluid, as the boundaries between you and not you begin to blur, remember that you too are on a journey. You too were born from something ancient and elemental, formed from genetic and social and cosmic forces you did not choose and cannot fully understand. You too have accumulated your forms of power and faced your moments of rebellion and suffered your imprisonments and worn your circlets of obligation. You too are both the monkey under the mountain and the monkey on the cloud, both trapped and free, both limited by reality and unlimited by imagination, both bound to your body and capable of transformation, both individual and part of a pattern larger than any individual can comprehend. You too contain the potential for chaos and for order, for destruction and for protection, for pride and for humility, for rebellion and for service. Sleep now, child of earth and sky, child of stone and spirit, child of yang and yin, child of heaven and earth and the space between them. Sleep as Sun Wukong slept under his mountain, not in punishment, but in preparation, not in defeat, but in transformation, not in ending, but in pausing before continuation. The mountain of sleep presses down on you gently, holding you in place, not to imprison you, but to allow you to rest, to restore, to dream, to process the day's experiences and prepare for tomorrow's challenges. The iron pellets and molten copper become soft pillows and warm blankets. The 500 years become 8 hours, a manageable span, a gift rather than a punishment. The seal bearing the sacred mantra becomes your own intention to sleep, your own permission to let go of waking concerns, your own commitment to this necessary daily practice of cessation and renewal. May your dreams be populated with monkey kings and mountain peaks, with waterfalls and weapons, with transformations and travels, with teachers who speak in riddles and students who learn through suffering, with gods who rule from palaces and rebels who challenge from mountains, with journeys that begin with defiance and end with enlightenment, with stories that loop back to their beginnings and find new meanings in each telling. May you wake like Sun Wukong emerging from under 5 Elements Mountain, free and powerful and ready to serve, humbled by your trials, but not broken by them, still yourself, but transformed by your experience, still proud, but with your pride, now direct toward purpose, rather than self-aggrandizement, still strong, but with your strength now used to protect rather than to dominate. May you be the stone that births monkeys and the monkey that becomes Buddha, the rebel and the disciple, the chaos and the order, the imprisonment and the freedom, the mountain and the cloud, the beginning and the ending, and the endless cycle between them. If you've enjoyed this journey into Chinese mythology, if these ancient stories have helped guide you toward peaceful rest, please consider subscribing to Myth Drifting for more explorations of the legends and tales that have shaped human understanding across cultures and centuries. Let these stories be your companions in the space between waking and sleeping, their wisdom seeping into your dreams like rain into thirsty earth, their patterns becoming part of your own pattern, their transformations suggesting possibilities for your own transformation. Sleep well, and may you dream of mountains both crushing and supporting, of power both wild and directed, of freedom both absolute and conditional, of journeys both impossible and necessary, of transformations both painful and essential, of the eternal dance between the individual will and the cosmic order, between the stone monkey who defied heaven and the enlightened Buddha he would become.